Okay, we're good to go. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us and getting in right under the wire. Mr. Phelan, ladies and gentlemen, I have some very sad news. If you were in a West End theater, what you'd be hearing right now is a deep, booming voice saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, the role of Kath Pay will be played by Ryan Phelan this evening." So,
I do that a lot.
Yeah. But you're not interchangeable by any stretch of the imagination. So unfortunately, Kath can't be with us today. I'd love to say it's because she lives in Antigua and it's sunny and she just decided she couldn't. But no, she's been frantically trying to find a place with good connectivity, and even her backup connectivity wasn't good connectivity. So we're going to blame the internet gods on that one. But we are all here, and we are ready to kick off. So if I can get my technology working. Here we go. Perfect. So hello and good day to you wherever in the world you are. Welcome to Series 2, Episode number 3 of Holistic Emails, Email, and More. Today we've got a Q&A with two brilliant copywriters and Ryan. Janet Roberts, Nick Warren, and Ryan Phelan. Ryan, that was cheap. I'm sorry. That was
funny. That was funny. That was good.
Cheap is good.
So every 2 weeks, as you all know, we showcase a different topic with a different panel of experts. It's not rehearsed, clearly. The audience, you guys are live, so you get to ask us your burning questions, and you get to hear our candid answers, or more importantly, our panel's candid answers. So please ask your questions in the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Use the chat for everything else. I'll try to keep up with all of this. I'm a bit new to this platform, so we'll see how it goes. And don't forget to leave us some feedback at the end. Interestingly, that's actually a really good point. Where is the chat? Oh, there it is. Okay, I got it. Good. Cool. So leave us some feedback on our professionalism at the end. When you arrived, you may have noticed that, or my professionalism anyway, you may have noticed that in addition to the speed networking area, we also have some roundtables set up. And we're going to use those to continue the conversation later. So after the panel, join us to network, meet some peers, and also ask our panel of experts your burning questions and keep the conversation going. Now, obviously, many of you might not have planned to be on camera today, but come as you are, do not worry. We are not going to judge. It's a very safe space to be. Now, if you're like me, you thought Series 1 of Email More smashed it. So we are incredibly, incredibly grateful to our sponsors for allowing us to get these great discussions out to more marketers, out to more people. So big thank you to our Series Gold sponsors, Iterable and Validity, and our Silver sponsors, RPE Origin and Email Expert. Now, speaking of Series 1, if you missed them, or missed it, or missed the episodes, whichever, you can binge on it now, either in the Holistic Email YouTube channel or on the Holistic Email website. We'll put links to both those in the chat so that you can avail yourself of that at any time, of course, after this great episode. So as I said, I am Skip Federa, and I'm your moderator this afternoon or this evening or this morning, whichever works for you. And with me today, I've got Janet Roberts of Content by Janet Roberts, Nick Warren of Stories Mean Business, and Ryan Phelan, whose title I didn't even get a chance to get his title. Ryan is the founder and CEO, right? CEO of RPE Origin? CMO. Well, I'll let Ryan introduce himself in a second. So as I said, our topic today is copywriting and storytelling for email marketing. And whilst you are starting to type your questions in that question panel on the right-hand side, I'm going to let our panelists quickly introduce themselves. Janet, let's start with you.
Great. Thank you, Skip. And hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here today. I have been doing copywriting for, I'm kind of afraid to add up the years, how long I've been doing this. Well, it's been since 2004, so you do the math. I do have a background in writing. I was a newspaper reporter and magazine writer for a number of years, and that gave me a good discipline in writing the kind of writing you have to do for email, which is to the point. And today I have my own marketing writing consultancy, Content by Janet Roberts, not imaginative, but to the point. And I work primarily with companies in the B2B space, tech digital companies, And I also do some email copywriting, but I've kind of wandered over toward the long form content side of the equation. And I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. Nick, how about yourself?
Yeah, so my background, hi everyone, I'm Nick. My background is in the mid-90s. I was working in IBM as kind of a copywriter come producer, and I was 27. Can we all remember being 27? And because I was 27, I sort of thought I could do better. I was full of, as we say over here, piss and vinegar. And I sort of stropped out of IBM and accidentally really started a web agency, which lasted more or less until 2016, where I began to realize that company was never going to die. And that made me ask a question, which was, I was 45 in 2016. Do I want to be doing this exact same thing for the next 20 years? And the answer really was, no, I don't want to be doing it. So I've sold that business and really followed my passion, which is storytelling. And that's involved writing novels. My company's called Stories Mean Business. Writing thrillers, but also helping businesses, tell better stories. And the work that I do is essentially built on this foundation. People who tell better stories get better lives. So that's what I do now, really. I help founders typically tell stories that mean business.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Ryan.
Hi, folks. Ryan Phelan, Chief Marketing Officer and co-founder of RP Origin. Been in the email space since 1998, so you can do the same math that you did for Janet for that. Been on multiple sides of the fence. So I've been on the client side, running email programs for Sears and Kmart, and been on the agency side with RP Origin, and then also been on the vendor side with companies like Responsus and Adestra and a couple others. So really got a real rounded balance. Most of my career has been on the strategy side, so helping very large companies figure out how to tell their story, and then calling people like Janet and Nick to write it and develop it more. But I've been the author of quite a few white papers in the space, research articles, and I have a recurring column on Marketing Land. And so really excited today to talk to be here with everybody and talk about this.
Thanks, Ryan. And I've, ladies and gentlemen, I've already screwed up one thing. I forgot. I got confused. I can't multitask. I can't really multitask, and I did not manage to get the sponsors slide up on the screen. So don't worry. At the end, we'll linger on that a little bit longer for all of you sponsors who are watching, who are now going, "Hey, we didn't get to see our logo." Right. So funny enough. If we'd set this up, if Kath hadn't had her issue, we've almost got kind of a bit of a debate opportunity, because Ryan and I are kind of we kind of know what we want to say, but we're not very good at saying, or no, we're not, that we get a proper copywriter in to do it, and then the copywriter writes the copy and sends it back, and we're like, no, that's not it. without a whole much more than that. Okay, so I've got some questions, but we've already got some questions coming in from the audience. So let's jump right into the first one. And I am going to try very hard not to mess up this name. I'm going to go with Najma Salam. I hope I didn't mess that up. My guess is the J is probably somewhat silent. Anyway, I've recently joined a new workplace that has managed to get into a cadence of sending very sales-focused emails every week. Hopefully, this will change in future, but for now, how do I keep up the momentum in the copy week after week? How do you keep the treadmill going?
Let me jump in on that one right away, because that is one of the things that I do for my clients, is kind of keep that pipeline of content full. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to come up with an editorial calendar. And that's just kind of a fancy word of saying you're going to take some time and you're going to plan out what you're going to be doing. Now, when you talked about sending sales-focused emails every week, I don't know if you mean that that's one email a week or if you're sending out 2 or 3 emails a week. Whatever your cadence is, have a calendar that looks at very specifically what you want to send, what days, the goal of that email, the audience you're sending it to, if you're not sending it to your entire audience, the kind of message you want to send, the images that you're going to need to pull. You might even want to, have the locations of those images in your digital library if you have one. And being able to look at your calendar and seeing what you have coming up for that week means you can work ahead, so you can get out ahead of that onslaught of emails. That a lot of people that I've worked with have run into problems when they've just tried to do it one email at a time, and it takes over your life. But having an editorial calendar really does help you put everything in perspective, makes you approach it from a more strategic standpoint. So you're not saying the same thing over and over. You can even start linking emails together. In one email, you have this content, and then in our next email, we'll have this, so that you're giving people something to look forward to.
Thanks, Janet. That's really insightful. I think the piece for me, and I learned this the hard way when a couple years ago, I was trying to launch a podcast, and we were trying to produce on demand, and you just can't do it. And you very quickly, the pandemic has given us an opportunity to see how even news organizations don't do it. They've got a lot of material canned and ready to go to fill in when they need it. Mm-hmm. And you can always tell it now, because I always say this was filmed before the pandemic, because people are very close together. You can see how much stuff has just been sitting around waiting to go. So that's a great tip. Nick, Ryan, you have anything you want to jump in on that one?
I just say, there's an inference in the question actually that maybe that isn't the best thing for you to be doing every week. And of course, context is massively important when you're copywriting. So a lot would depend on the kind of business that you've moved into. But certainly from my point of view, from the kind of copy I write, it tends to be much more about the kind of the relationship side and building the relationship that brings the sale. So, I'll defer to Janet. She's obviously got much more experience than I have in this kind of cadence. But I would ask the question, if you're new there, what's the response to the emails? Because you can go to the well too often. And, the question is always, for me, is how full is it? And what's the best cadence? Is it actually once a week? Is it twice a month? Is it once a month? So try and get into that habit of talking to the people in charge and talking about, what are the options? What can we test? What can we try to see whether we can get something that works better? If it's working fine, great. But if it's not, then you've got an opportunity to make a mark, I would say.
Well, Nick, that's actually a great segue. I'm going to throw this one to you, Ryan. How I'm going to mess up the person's name again. How can Najma build a business case that says, clearly they think that this is not the right way to go? How can they build a business case to go up the chain and say, hey, we got to stop doing this?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. Mainly it's testing, right? We always say if you want to try something different, test it, right? And the easiest way to do that is look at not only your competitive space, but the adjacent verticals to your space and say, look how these people are doing it. And we don't want to copy them exactly, but they've may be onto something if it's done in all these different competitors. Make a case for a testing scenario where you use less text. Maybe you use half as much. Maybe you use the full amount and test into what the better response is. I would add on it, and going back to the last piece too, I would add on to what Janet and Nick said is, I think it's two things to solve this in your conversations with other people. Emails, whether they're sales or B2C, tell a story. What's the story you're trying to tell? And do you need to use so many words to tell the story? If you need that many words to tell a story, then you're not telling it well, right? It should be easy. It should be quick. Talk about how many seconds people have to engage in an email. The second thing I would do is a lot of companies should have, and they don't, they have brand standards or brand guidelines. They have a tone of voice. They have a document that really lays out what the voice stands for, what the brand stands for. I would go back and maybe work to update that document to say, How many words do we use? How do we describe ourselves? How do we describe our product? Really try to standardize that at the brand level so that it cascades down into rules for the communication.
Yeah, those are both really, really good points. I do like the notion, though, that if your story does require a lot of words to tell it, or if you can tell it a lot of different ways, there's something. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but the old days when they used to serialize a novel in the newspaper, right? If you've got to send an email every week, maybe what you do is you take a step back and you say, okay, so over the next 24 weeks, I'm telling this story, and it's got 24 chapters, and I'm going to put one chapter in a week, something like that.
Yep. And that goes to Janet's content calendar, right? Make the content calendar incredibly complex to look at product, to look at seasonal, to look at product releases. My content calendars are incredibly complex just to be able to tell the right story at that point in time.
Some of this too is my understanding from what Najma was saying was that some of this is out of his or her control. If you come into a situation where the person before you, or maybe 3 or 4 people before you in this role decided that like a daily email is the way to go, you're not good. You need to get in there and kind of get out ahead of the process, make it work for you, and then go back and look at how effective is this? What do our engagement metrics tell us? So it's almost like we've got 2 issues going on here. But I think marrying the storytelling idea that Nick is talking about with a plan to tell that story, to tell a series of connected emails. So, getting back to Skip's mention about the old serialized novels, if it worked for Dickens, it's going to work for us. And having that strategic viewpoint of not just, getting an email out there because you have to, but because you have a specific story to tell, and your calendar, your editorial calendar tells you that this is the story you're going to be telling. I also want to clarify, though, when we talk about a calendar, we're not talking about sending an email because the calendar tells you need to send it. Like we send emails every Monday. Do you have something that has to go out in that email every Monday? A calendar, and an editorial calendar, is really just a fancy spreadsheet that sets out your plan. Once you have your plan, you can begin to see what's going on. You can even put your engagement metrics in to that plan so you can track trending kind of at one quick glance. It's really what works for you, but just being able to take some time to step back and write everything down, come up with a plan, is going to help you at least get out of in front of it until you can go in there and look at, changing the course of the ship.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Janet. One of the things that I always try to equate what we do as email marketers to relationships. And that point that you just made of, we send an email because we send an email on Monday. So we're sending this email on Monday. And the question is, do you have anything to say? And if anybody here is struggling to come get their head around that, I want you to think about the phone calls, probably the FaceTime calls or the Zoom calls that you've had with family members every weekend for the last year. Because sometimes you have something to say, and sometimes you all kind of look at each other and just sort of stare at each other, and it's very boring.
Yes. There's an old sales saying that says, just because you have something to say doesn't mean you need to say it.
Right. Interestingly enough, today, 1 year ago today was the last time I saw any of my coworkers face to face. So that's a big milestone. Not a good one, but a big one. So Nick, I want to pick up on something that Ryan said. He dashed through it, but actually, funny enough, we got a question in from Matthew Dunn on the very same lines. And the question is, the average email is read for 11 seconds, according to Litmus. That's 33 words to the average reader. Now, you talk about storytelling. How do you tell a story in 33 words, or,
Right. Okay. So let's get into this then. Well, an average is sometimes something that can really lead you astray, because no one is actually average. It's just the that's just the number we come out with when we do the division, right? But when we were, building websites to convert, it may be on your average website, you get 2% conversion. Well, you're not looking at the other 90% or the 98% to affect them, because there's loads of people at the top of that who are never going to convert, right? They're just, someone who reads 33 words, depending on how long your email is, it's not going to be your target market because they're just not into it enough. So what we want to focus on is the 2% of people, percents 3 and 4, if you like, who nearly bought, they nearly read, they nearly did the thing you wanted them to do, and focus on those people. And if you do that, you double your, whatever you're trying to do, you double the number of people taking it up. So I think it's really important. Averages seem like they're useful, particularly when we've got really big numbers, but they can really lead us astray when we're trying to think strategically. So yeah, it's important to get people's attention. Of course it is. And you will lose people. I mean, we used to have, you might get people who land on a web page and are gone within 10 seconds, 3 seconds, and if you do that in Google Analytics, you can really see, well, those people clearly aren't getting it. They don't matter. So how are we focusing on the ones that were there for 5 minutes or read to the end and then they didn't do the thing? What can we find out about those guys? I think it's really important to have that kind of mindset when you're trying things and testing things.
So dwell time is kind of one of those vanity metrics that looks good on paper, but actually it can drive the wrong decision making.
If someone's read to the end or stayed on a page for a long time and not done something, then that's an interesting bit of information, right? That is an interesting signal. What I'm saying is that there is a whole load of people who will just land and almost immediately go, and they are not your market. So what we need to do is we need to find out the people, like I say, the people who nearly converted, nearly bought, nearly clicked. Does that make sense?
I think it's a great point, Nick, because in let's just take B2B as an example. B2B is about discovering and enhancing intent, converting intent at whatever level you have it in the pipeline. Your point is perfect, because what you want to focus in on are the people that have intent.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a vast amount of people that don't have that intent, and they're not. It's your job to move them along, but you're really focused on those people that have intent and that react to the message. If you're on the B2C side, then the text image ratio comes into play, your website comes into play more. There's all kinds of different factors, but really I've always focused on the people that have intent, or I can turn them into that, and that's what I get, and I don't expect it to be a large number.
No, exactly.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Thank you both very much for that. Right. So the next question comes from Mariana Santiago, who is an email who is an email. No, she's not email. She's a copywriter and an email marketer. You got to read all the words in the right order. That's critical.
Yes.
Is there any overlap in the storytelling necessary for an enthralling above the fold newspaper article, and that is required, I guess, for an email that'll sell whatever it's meant to sell? So that's a very great way of phrasing how long is long enough, I think.
Well, like any good newspaper article needs a really strong headline. And I did headline writing as a copy editor for years. And to be honest with you, I really sucked at it. I was not a good headline writer. And one of the things that I learned how to do, I learned from Mad Men, believe it or not. It was watching Don Draper sitting at his little Selectric typewriter, for those of you who remember what those are, and writing 25 taglines and telling somebody you can't leave the office until you write 25 taglines. And you do the big eye roll. But honestly, that's a great exercise to focus your attention, and it starts your mind. It starts the synapses firing. And by the time you get to the bottom of that list, you actually have a pretty good either headline or tagline or copy phrase or whatever you need. It's a little bit of just that forced focus discipline. excuse me. So I think it starts with a good attention-getting headline. It doesn't mean it has to be a full sentence. It can be just a good gripping phrase, and that can be your entree into the storytelling. And a little bit going back to Matthew's point about how can you tell it in 33 words? Well, maybe not, but you can at least get them started in those first 33 words, can get them started enough to want them to continue reading either through the end of the email or to jump to the website. So that would be my contribution, but I'm going to hand this one off to the storytelling expert for, his viewpoint there.
Yeah, so yes is the answer. Definitely there is an overlap. And again, I can't stress enough how much context makes a difference when we're, there are plenty of products where there's no need to tell a long, enthralling story. But essentially what we're talking about all the time is opening up loops, sort of putting questions into people's mind that they want answered. And, I've written 120,000 word novels that are essentially that same basic rhythm, tension seeks resolution, essentially. Yeah. So when we're talking about a headline, like Janet's just mentioned, we're talking about something that ideally opens up a question. And the only job of that headline is to get people to read the next sentence, right? And if you read, kind of classic copywriting manuals, this is what they'll say. The job of the second sentence is to make you read the third sentence. And what you're doing all the time is you're building that kind of connection. And if you're telling a story that has resonance and emotion and perhaps some vulnerability, depending on what you're selling, you will start to create a connection. And what stories do, if you tell them right, is they start to create chemical changes in our brain. We get hits of dopamine or cortisol or oxytocin, creating kind of attention or stress or empathy or whatever it is. But it really matters. This context question really matters. I have a client who he charges people $6,000 American to take them on 3,000 kilometer journeys up through Nepal into Tibet and to Everest. So when we're telling his, a story for him in his kind of email sequences, you need to take people through a real journey to get them to the point where they're going, sign me up. I want to do this thing. And part of that series is about educating them about the journey they will go through, because it's not easy. But we're telling, for the right audience, we're telling a story that really kind of grabs them, that pulls them along. And I think there's a difference between the kind of copy that gets talked about very often, which is to do with direct response, it's to do with conversion, and the kind of copy that can pull people along. And they're not always the same thing. And again, it very much depends on the thing that you're selling. But the tools and the techniques of storytelling are absolutely appropriate for emails in the right context.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I want to go back to something that Janet said for a second. Nick, I'm sure you're going to have a viewpoint on this as well, but Janet gets first crack because she used the line, the example of you can't leave the office till you've written 25 subject lines, essentially, which opens up the question, copywriter versus AI, especially when it comes to subject lines.
Right.
So, discuss.
Here's a grenade. Go.
Well, okay. Now, I have looked at some of the, I can't remember, what is the company that was really the pioneer in AI written subject lines?
Phrasey or?
Not Phrasey.
Oh, it was the other one.
You know who I'm talking about. There is a company that it kind of started this whole thing. And, at first a group of us were like, come on, give us a break here. There is a role for AI influencing subject lines, because that takes in all sorts of areas that covers some creative content that humans produce. And it is measured against engagement, what gets audiences engaged, so that, and I've seen demonstrations of this where it can help you sharpen your own. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where AI, you're just going to click a button and there'll be an autofill AI subject line. Because you still need that human element that can look at it and say, the machine says this is what we should be doing, but we happen to know that if we have this word in here, this is going to resonate more with people. This is going to get them to open the email. So it's a combination of the art and science. We always talk about email being both an art and a science, because you can measure so much of what you do, but there's also you can measure and test, but there's also something in the back of your mind that tells you this is a popular word, but it's not a word that's going to get our audience to open. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that I welcome our AI overlords in this case, but I'm not really intimidated by them, because I've gotten insight from that has helped with my own writing.
Janet, what you can't see, but we can see, is the Terminators right behind you.
Yes.
That's not true. No, that's Buzz Lightyear, isn't it?
Oh, no. Anyway.
I'm looking at Nick's camera.
Yeah.
Are you saying the Terminator is behind? Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. I've been looking at Buzz Lightyear this whole time. So, yeah, and afraid of no ghost.
Okay. All right. Well, Brian, you're representing the practitioner side. What are your thoughts on that?
I love Phrasee. I love the groups out there in that one company that we can't think of that started this whole mess. If for nothing else, is that it gets marketers off their obsession with crafting the perfect subject line.
Yes.
Get out of the subject line business, right? Great. Go to a tool, type in your stuff, hit the enter, pick one, go. Okay. Let's focus on the rest of it. I think that we as an industry spend way too much time thinking about the subject line and not enough time thinking about what's actually in the email. I think that data sciences can give a whole lot of information about what to say and how to say it, but it only truly works if you're doing multiple versions for multiple cohort groups and really looking at the behavior of that cohort group and how you can speak to them individually. And unless you have that sophistication, then you have to appeal to a broad audience. And in that broad audience, you're going after this small segment of people that will react. And you're leading them to the website where the fuller story can be told. So I think AI can give us a lot of information, but to Janet's point, it does still need the marketer to have some oversight or some parental guidance on how it's carried out. Because a computer can't do sarcasm, computer can't do empathy, can't do, there's things it can't do. It's not the perfect solution.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that where it does fill a gap is, one of the things I've ranted about for years is that so few email marketers have access to a copywriter, a real copywriter.
Yeah.
We are, instead of having a copywriter for email marketing, we are email marketers that have to do copy. And to tell somebody who's not a copywriter, sit down and write 25 versions of this, they're going to come up with 25 very similar versions of the same
crap
thing.
Versions. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like they took 15 words, threw them in a bucket, pulled out 5. Well, that's a subject line. Did it again. So I think those systems actually fill a gap because we don't tend to get professional copywriters a lot of the time involved in our email marketing, which is a shame. And that's probably a panel discussion for another time. So, but that's a nice transition into, we've got an audience here of people who are being forced to write copy. Maybe copywriting isn't necessarily their specific forte. And we've got a couple of questions here from somebody called Summer Morel Nichols, who is a master's student and is looking to get into copywriting as a career. So first question, I have very little experience working with brands / industry and wondered what is the best way to start or gather up a portfolio of work that would help? And then the second question follows on is, which I think is kind of a good for the broader audience, is, are there any good resources online, good online courses, or good books to go buy and read, or whatever, that will improve your copywriting?
Let me jump in on that one first. I'm going to look at the second part of the question first, which is online courses or books. And there actually is a ton of help out there. And I'm almost afraid to switch my screen, but I pulled together a resource list that I can email to anybody who leaves their email address in the chat. That includes, there's companies like, there's a website called Marketing Profs, which is, they cover just about everything that there is to talk about in marketing, including copywriting. There's also a website called Copybloggers, and Copybloggers does a lot of very tactical, here's how to do this better webinars and things. So I think it's Copybloggers. Let me see, where's my sheet here? It's marketingprofs.com. And then it's Copybloggers, which is not on my list. Sorry. I must have gotten disturbed when I was coming up with this list. Another good source is a writer called Nick Usborne. He does a course called Conversational Copywriting, and that is aimed at more B2B writers who are looking to be able to speak more clearly, not rely on jargon so much. One book that should be on every copywriter's either tablet or phone or desktop or next to their bed is a book called Everybody Writes by Anne Handley, who is one of the goddesses of the copywriting world. She's very good at helping you write clearly, organizing your thoughts, organizing your time, coming up with different viewpoints. So that is a book that I highly recommend. And that's my quick list. So Nick, how about you?
Yeah, that's a good book. I mean, I'm just looking at my shelf. I've got tons of copywriting books. None of which I can remember just off the top of my head or quite see, but a really good place. There's Copy Chief. If you Google Copy Chief, I mean, that's a community you pay for month to month, but fantastically welcoming community, great information, and they are very focused on building, the skills that you need. There's also a site called tinylittlebusinesses.com run by a guy called Andre Chaperone, who has a very different an approach that's really influenced me actually in terms of the, how to create content that converts and have conversations with people. And I'd really recommend, he's got loads of free information because he's generous that way. It's really worth going to that site and digging in. And I think the advice to the other question is the same advice that all writers give to people who want to write, which is you just get into it, start writing, start testing, look at the kind of ads you see in Facebook and start pulling them apart and see what you think is working, see what you think is better. We can build a portfolio whether we've got clients or not, actually. And I think this is one of the differences between people who really want to do it, like really want to do it because it is work, and those who wait to be asked or wait to get a client, if that makes sense.
I would say my go-tos are I would do both of what you guys say, but then I would also, copywriting and storytelling is a science. And take your favorite brand and try to reverse engineer why they're writing the way they're writing. How does it fit in with the rest of their brand image? How does it fit in with their commercials, with their website? Try to reverse engineer how the person who wrote that copy got to where they are. Because when I work with Janet or any of the people in this industry, it is a science to try to decode how to best communicate it. And generally it's following brand standards, it's following documentation and discussions that have had about how do we describe ourselves and everything. If you can try and figure that out, then you got a leg up, right? But I agree with Nick, just get in and start doing it. You're not going to be the top star when you walk in the door, but you work up to it and you just get experience over time. And it takes a while, but I've been in this industry 22 years and I'm still working my keister off. So,
And you learn. And as Skip said also, there are plenty of people who need copywriters who don't have copywriters.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities. And I think, one of the things that any serious book or course or person will tell you is that if you want to write great copy, you need to really get into the heads of the audience, like really get into the heads. So, try the products, use the products, talk. I'm doing some work with some artists at the moment. And not only am I interviewing these artists, I'm also in my spare time creating art because I want to get into their heads. I want to get into that kind of that mindset. And if you can do that, you can start to talk to them in their own voices. It's like you're a voice in their head. You're reading their mind. And this can be really powerful. It's the kind of thing that lots of people who just read the books or read the websites or what have you, and then apply the rules, they don't get that kind of connection. And that's really where you start to make sales, I think, as a copywriter.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. And actually, I want to dig into that a little bit more with Brian and Janet. But Matthew Dunn reminded me of my favorite copywriting book. I used to work for Ogilvy, and when you started at Ogilvy, you got all the David Ogilvy books. So if you've never read anything that David Ogilvy's written, definitely take the time. It's worth it. He has some great advice, but he also has some great one-liners. And, my one for copy is always, we sell or else. And that's your job.
It's true.
If we're not selling, we're not doing a good job. But Nick makes a really good point about getting into the heads, or walking a mile in the moccasins or the shoes of your readers, your target audience. And going back to David Ogilvy, Ogilvy had at least through when I worked there, and probably still does, this ethos that came directly from David, which is we use our customers' products not to be sycophantic, but how else are we going to understand what the customer goes through? So for those of you who are a little bit older, we're talking now, probably 12 years ago, so 2009, and we were still using Lotus
Notes
for email, which made it really hard to do email marketing for our clients. But that was a different problem at the time. Janet, how do you get into the mindset of the audience?
Well, one of the ways is I look at, I'm thinking of someone that I just did some copywriting for. I looked at their website first because I have to start from the assumption that somebody there knows what their customers are looking for and the kind of language that appeals to them. So I look at that for some guidance. I also ask them for keywords, for the search keywords that perform best for them, because that tells me this is what their customers are looking for. If you have, if it's a swimsuit brand, maybe you're looking for size inclusive, or you're looking for tankini or something like that. That gives you an idea of what the customers are coming to the brand looking for. I also look at their emails. I do some work for a company called MailCharts, which is a huge repository of all different kinds of emails. They've got over millions and millions of emails. And I will go in and I'll look at a brand and look at their emails and see how are they, how are they using language? How are their competitors using language? Do a little bit of competitive analysis. And that kind of triangulation helps you understand what the audience is looking for, what they are hearing from the brands that they're interested in, what they're hearing from the brands that they're competitors for. You go out and you order, if it's something that, if it's a consumer brand, I wouldn't say go out and, sign a contract with a major ESP just to walk around there. But, if I'm doing some writing for an ESP, I will often ask for a demo so I can understand how it works and talk to someone who is front facing with customers, talk to someone from their support team or an account exec to say, what are the problems that people are having? Where are you finding people bouncing in the process? So you really have to become almost an investigative reporter and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions, or questions that you might think would be obvious. If you don't know the answer and you're a smart person, there's no shame in asking what seems to be obvious questions. So you just get in there and really dig and think about your own motivations, your own relationship to the product. Now, you can't use yourself as the test model for copy, because there's another line, isn't there, about we are not the customer? Something, yep. Do you remember that? Okay.
It's unfortunately, it hasn't aged well, because it does come across as quite sexist. But yes, the point was, if you market to yourself, and this is true, I mean, today still, right? The average marketer in the UK lives inside the M25. The vast majority of the country doesn't live inside the M25. Right. So right there, we are not normal people. You can't
rely on your own experience, but if you're talking about a fast-moving consumer good, like a bottle of wine or a meal prep kit or something, you can look at how would you respond to that? What would you be looking for from that? And then test your assumptions against, again, what are the keywords that work for them? What kind of copy are their competitors using? And all of that triangulation can point you in the right direction. And then you just go and do it. And if it's wrong, you go back and you do it over until it's right.
Jen, I think you hit two great points in there. One is something that I ask whenever I go into work with a client on an email project, and that is, right, what's your keyword strategy? And so often they have no idea. That the search team sits just there. Go ask them.
Go talk to them.
Yeah. And there are lots of great reasons to do that. Going back to kind of how long should the email be and how long do people read it? Well, a lot of people don't even open it, but they see the subject line and
that
the words in the subject line. Exactly.
Yeah, the nudge effect.
And then the other one is, I don't think there is a stupid question, because so often when we're trying to describe our product or our service, because we know it so well, we jump right into the how. Very often, the number of times I've worked with a client and said, what do you do? Well, it says right here on your website. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It says how you do it. It hasn't told me what it's going to do for me. What's the value? What's the benefit to me as a customer? So I think, actually going in with that kind of wide-eyed, somewhat naive approach, does your mom get it? If your mom understands what you do, then you're probably doing a pretty good job of selling it.
Well, that's the old Warren Buffett test. Warren Buffett is, for those of you who don't know who he is, he's a billionaire investor, and he sends out a letter to his shareholders every year. He is the head of Berkshire Hathaway, or he was, and he writes it to his sister. He writes the shareholder letter as if he were explaining things to his sister, who is not a stupid person, but she's not a financial wizard. She's an ordinary person who probably thinks like a lot of the shareholders. The idea being that gives you a very clear writing style. It focuses, it explains things so people can understand it. It doesn't assume that you know more than you do. It doesn't talk down to you, but it helps you understand the points you're trying to make. And to me, I honestly read that every year. And I am not a financial genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I can understand what he's talking about. So.
That's really interesting. On those same lines, I'm not going to suggest that, well, first of all, I'm guessing Warren Buffett doesn't write his own annual report. Probably. He's probably got people for that. But a question that has come in again from Mr. Dunn. So Nick, we'll start with you. Just curious, are there any authors, fiction or otherwise, that have particularly helped you or inspired you? And do you go back to them over and over again? Or are there any authors that you go back to over and over again?
So fiction, very mainstream, Stephen King. I think I've read everything he's written, some of it twice, and that's a lot of books. Also Lee Child, I think is very, very good at creating that kind of story momentum that pulls people through. And an awful lot of the work that I do, if I'm writing, I don't know, a 1,500 word story for a founder or something, has got quite a kind of a clipped Lee Child sort of style. On the non-fiction side, there are so many books. If you're interested in story, there's a really good one called The Science of Story by a guy called Will Storr, which is really worth checking out because it gets into some of this sort of evolutionary psychology, which is the reason why we're so wired for story. Similar book, The Storytelling Animal, by a guy called Jonathan Gonashall, I think, something like that. Well worth reading if you want to get into the kind of the deeper levels of how we convince people, how we connect with people, and how we sell them some bigger things, I suppose. I mean, that's the difference. I keep talking about context in this conversation, but most of my clients are selling relatively high or complicated, high worth or high or complicated goods, and I think these are the kind of things where story becomes more relevant because you need to really bring people with you. So The Science of Story, Stephen King. There you go. That's two of my recommendations. That keeps you busy.
Yeah, it will, and so will Lee Child because he's prolific as well. And I'm also a big fan, and I would love to meet the person who actually thought that, Tom Cruise can play this character.
Right.
I'm hoping Tom's not listening. Tom, if you're listening to this panel discussion, I apologize.
I think he just jumped. So
you're just not big. You're just not big enough. Just not big enough. Anyway, you're a big star. Don't get me wrong, but not physically big enough. Janet, how about you? Authors that you go back to or inspired you?
I've mentioned Anne Handley, and I get her weekly newsletter. Well, actually, it's bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, and I read that first thing. It comes in on early Sunday morning, and that is my go-to every day. As far as book authors, I'll be honest with you. I use reading as an escape from work. So, if I say I really like Donna Leone, who writes great Italian police procedurals, I learned nothing about copywriting from her. On the other hand, I have all these great ideas for Italian food because the guy loves to eat and his wife is a great cook. So that, the author thing, as far as reading books, the only other book I would recommend for really good writing, clear writing style, is the old standby of Strunk and White that has been on every writer's desk. If you go through any kind of college writing course, they'll recommend Strunk and White. And actually, now that I think of it, another good resource, this is going to be out of left field, is the AP Associated Press Manual of Style, which on the one hand is, well, when I was still in newspapers, it was this thick, spiral bound, and it told you how to refer to everything correctly, but it also had a lot of really good clear writing lessons and how to kind of take the air out of some of your writing. I used to work with a writer that my husband said was easiest to edit by using the delete paragraph key.
Wow.
And I have to admit, but those two sources are very good for giving you ideas on how to write clearly, comprehensively, writing to an audience, understanding an audience, and then going from there.
Now, if for those of you over here in the UK who may not have ever heard of the AP Style Guide, the Oxford, my favorite is the Oxford Style Guide. It's not as big. It's about 8-10. I think it's about 16 pages of a PDF. Nick, what do you use?
The Economist Style Guide generally.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll check that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ryan, any authors that have inspired you, or you go back to that help you with your copywriting? Or
no, so the people that inspire me are on the screen. I'm like Janet. When I'm done with work and I read a book, I'm reading it for purely entertainment to disconnect from the channel. And so I read a lot of just weird books, and I'm the classic submarine war spy movie spy stuff, and it's just because they really describe things well. And I think the only thing I learn is how they describe different technologies and different actions. I mean, try to describe how to dive a submarine under the ocean, right? I mean, they just do a good job. But I rely on, and I think that's a good role for a marketer, is I rely on my copywriting team to make it pretty, because I know the limits of what I'm good at. And I think a marketer, a really well-rounded marketer, needs to know the limit of, maybe I shouldn't write copy. Maybe I should just tell somebody my ideas and they should go write the pretty.
Actually, you hit on two things there. I totally agree with the second part. If you can afford a copywriter, get one. If anybody, hopefully Summer will join us at the roundtables. If you need a copywriter, Summer's looking for work, so we can, sort that problem out right there. And the other thing is, freelance copywriters, you don't have to pay them loads. I'm not saying I'm not devaluing their service by any stretch of the imagination. That they are worth their weight in gold, but sometimes their gold is different than yours. So, for example, when offices reopen again, sometimes they wouldn't mind a place to work, some free internet, and some good coffee. And you offer them a desk, and you can do a quid pro quo. So, don't be afraid to don't say, oh, well, I'll never get budget for a copywriter, and then just don't pursue that. But the other point you made, Ryan, about the submarine books, I was going to say my favorite author is Tom Clancy. And one of the reasons that I've always found it, well, he's a great author, great storyteller, but, in my house, we read things two different ways. So, my partner, she is a speed reader naturally. She once almost failed a speed reading class. And when she went to the teacher and said, I don't understand why I can't do this, the teacher's like, just read for me normally. And the teacher's like, right, you're already speed reading. So when you try to speed reading, you're getting like every 40th word. The other thing is, she can't visualize things in her head. So that detailed description of how you dive a submarine, she couldn't care less. And what's great about Clancy is you can kind of get into his cadence, and there's the story bits, and then there's the technical bits, and she just skips over the technical bits. And the way his writing style is, you can do that really easily.
Yeah.
Your eye flows across it.
Brad Thor does that. Yeah, Brad Thor does that. Rick Campbell does that. There's a bunch of authors that they do separate that out, and I think that's great.
Cool. Well, listen, everybody, that's all we have time for today. I'm going to see if I can't actually get the sponsor logos up on the screen. Hopefully that'll do it. It's thinking about it. Well, it thinks about it. So we would love to have your feedback, as I said, on my level of professionalism, if nothing else, over in the chat, which is on that side. So please go ahead and do that. A huge thank you to our gold sponsors, Iterable and Validity, and our silver sponsors, RPE Origin and Email Expert. And of course, thank you again to Janet and Nick. And also thank you to Ryan for stepping in last minute and helping us out when Kath wasn't able to join us. You all provided some amazing insights, and I hope the audience all got, we're getting some claps. I didn't even know you could get claps. That's cool. And hearts. We're getting claps and hearts. So the audience clearly loved what you guys had to say. So thank you so much for coming along. Now, as I said, we have set up some roundtables. When I end the session, go into the roundtables. This is your opportunity to continue the conversation. We'll split up amongst different tables and let not very many people turn up, and then we'll kind of all make just one big table and have a bit of a party. So go out, find a table, turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, be part of the conversation. Now, like I said earlier, don't worry if you're wearing that oh so comfy but slightly tattered hoodie. We're not going to judge. It's a totally safe space. None of the conversations will be recorded. Chatham House rules will apply. So it'll be just a lot of good fun. Now, right before you leave, in 2 weeks, the wonderful Adiola Soul will be back in the host chair. Not this chair. She'll probably be at her house. And she's going to be moderating a follow-up discussion on Black diversity in email. So join Adiola and her guests, Kwabena Ejanana, Lisa Jones, Gavin Lojny, and Annette Evans. Kwabena is from Google, Lisa's from iMail, Gavin is from Dot Digital, and Annette is from GPS. They'll be here in 2 weeks. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. I hope you can take the time to join them. Until then, thanks for joining. Stay safe and make good decisions.